President Cyril Ramaphosa will subject himself to the ANC's Integrity Commission to account for the controversy surrounding the funding of his 2017 campaign to lead the ANC. The CR17 campaign was the vehicle used to mobilize financial support for Ramaphosa's presidential ambitions. Newzroom Afrika has reliably learned that the president used his opening speech at the ANC's Special National Executive Committee meeting to tell his detractors that he's not above party discipline and scrutiny. Ramaphosa has been under attack from his opponents within the party, including former President Jacob Zuma, to account for the alleged 1 billion rand that was privately raised for his campaign 3 years ago. The NEC meeting started off on Friday and will end off tomorrow. We stay with that story. We're now joined by political analyst Dr. Somadoda Fikeni to discuss this weekend's dramatic developments coming from the ANC. We also explore the letter by former President Jacob Zuma chastising his successor Cyril Ramaphosa over his take on corruption within the party. Good evening. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Dr. Fikeni. I want us to begin with the story that is developing this evening, and that is, of course, as we have reliably learned, that the president has of course, agreed to subject himself to the party's Integrity Commission. Certainly, this is something that is raising eyebrows, and a lot of people are talking about it. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I do think that it is quite a positive issue because it sends a signal that no one is bigger than the systems that are placed in the party, because it was becoming clear that the issue of his campaign funding is now being used and put at the center as one of the reasons why others believe it's a political witch hunt to call them. So once he goes there, Ace Magashule and several others will have little but no option but to go and subject themselves to the same process. But most important, though, will be whether the Integrity Committee will be respected, because we do not have a history of them going back to the NEC or top 6 and their decisions being respected.
And talking about that very important point, because it doesn't look like, that history is really positive when it comes to the recommendations of the Integrity Commission. What do you make tonight, particularly when it comes to this commission that really has not been respected? Do you get a sense that this time, given the letter that we saw from the president last week and some of those within the party that are talking tough against corruption, do you get a sense that we may see the recommendations being followed through here?
It may, but it takes political will. The problem here is a structural one. If you go back to the very same NEC to approve certain decisions of the Integrity Committee, and it so happened that many members of the NEC are equally implicated, then there is a contradiction there, because they have to approve something that impacts on their existential outlook in the political career they have. So you would have to establish something independent, and you would have to give the Integrity Committee something which says once they have findings, those findings ought to find expression by the way of implementation. But for as long as it is being referred to the very same people who are implicated, whose political future is at stake, then it makes little or no sense.
And certainly a difficult time it's going to be for the president, especially looking at the fact that when you look back at Nasrec, he did not really win the ANC. He won the conference. And certainly it's going to be difficult for him as he charts the way forward around corruption, especially given the letter that we saw yesterday by the former president, and also seeing the developments around the former eThekwini Mayor Zandile Gumede, seeing Andile Lungisa, they're coming into the fray, and also the ANC NEC member Tony Ngeni asking him to do the right thing.
Certainly, he did not win the Nasrec conference. It was a stalemate, and he won by the slimmest of margins. But what happened thereafter is the fact that his opponent politically, though still within the same top 6, Ace Magashule, who is leading the other faction within, has had a hand in the political machinery of the party. Hence, he was able to deploy some of the people who are loyal, to his faction in parliament, in some key positions within the committees of the ANC. That's where the president finds himself rather confined in many ways to operate within. Perhaps even the letter being written directly to the members, it was a manifestation of some of the challenges he's facing in getting the favor and full support within the top leadership structures of the ANC. It is no coincidence that the prominent members of the other faction have coordinated their activities around the letters they are writing, the calls and so forth. And the timing here is not a mistake. It's for two reasons. This attack would have come during the NGC, which has now been postponed. And now there is this pressure for the law enforcement to move on the corruption issues. There is this pressure of COVID-19 PPE corruption issues. And some of them are trying to forestall those by saying, if I am pursued, it's a political witch hunt, why don't you start with those who belong to your faction and so forth. So here you do have a situation where each side is saying, though I might be wrong, your side is wrong too.
And what do you think reignited this apparent fight back campaign? And especially when you go back to shortly after, the Nasrec conference, we then saw the current Secretary General of the ANC coming out there speaking to some members. They're saying that it's only 5 years, comrades. And certainly when you look back now, it's not even, 5 years up yet, but we're seeing an apparent fight back. What do you think right now has reignited it? Could it be, as some are suggesting, that Ramaphosa's leadership may be, under question here?
Of course, those who never accepted his leadership, the question was always there, so it's not a matter of now. And it was a matter of opportunity as to how then do you have the muscle to tackle him. But the other thing that is happening now, there are calls by the society for swift action against those who are fingered in corruption. And some of them may find themselves saying the only way we can survive is to make sure that we forestall some of these processes and make sure that we weaponize them and make them political instead of dealing with them judicially or in administrative terms.
And I want us to also look back into the letter that was, released by, was penned by former President Jacob Zuma. And you see that in one of the, the points that he makes there, he says that a better life for all remains elusive. And yet he accuses President Ramaphosa of destroying the ANC. But certainly saying a better life for all remains elusive is something that is also discrediting the party that is currently governing.
It is, in fact, it is quite an irony that leaders who have had the time to bring that better life, once they are removed somehow, they have this out-of-body experience to say things are not going well. What we are seeing here is a cumulative effect over the years of some of the failures of systems, and therefore it is a succession of ANC leaders who might take ownership of some of these failures, because if they wanted to turn the situation around, by now we would be saying at least he had 2 terms, he managed to turn things around. But again, you realize that most of the programs of the radical economic transformation were being compressed towards the conference in Nasrec, when in fact we had many years before when this could have been done. So again, the notion of revolution or transformation is often used as a PR exercise rather than a very genuine one to say let's address the issues. And it is often used as a contested terrain between the different factions, which are more concerned about how they look rather than how people get improved.
And one of the things that's also really quite startling with this letter is the former president really calling on the current president to deal with his own issues his own way, as he says that he's also facing his own allegations on his own. But under, former President Jacob Zuma, we saw the ANC talking about collective responsibility. What has changed now?
Well, remember that in politics, if you're searching for consistency, you would find that being very rare. Most of the things that leaders stood against, once they are on the other side, tend to turn very swiftly against. You must also recall that Thabo Mbeki wrote in October 2008 a letter to then President of the ANC, Zuma. The reaction was quite swift. He was chastised, and issues raised were not entertained. Fast forward, you have the same situation of a letter now coming in. And that in itself tells us that political leaders change their positions depending on where they are placed at a given time, and they are free to contradict themselves and even the principles that they espouse to stand for.
As a final question from me tonight, the NEC, of course, is meeting this weekend. Certainly, we cannot expect that those discussions are somewhat cordial. What outcome are you expecting?
Well, I do think that ANC has become adept whenever they are faced with a crisis to come up with very complex explanation which seem to please everyone on all sides, and some compromises are struck. And that in itself increasingly is beginning to consume ANC's intellectual and strategic energies, because the more they are doing the navel gazing of internal dynamics of managing their factional battles, the more they are drifting away from national interest, especially at the time when the country is facing the worst crisis it has seen in many, many decades, which are compounded by COVID-19.
Thank you.